Welcome to part 3 of the series, Fastest HDRI for VFX equals Ricoh Theta Z1. In the last videos, I taught you how to download and install the new HDRI app from Ricoh Theta, how to capture an HDRI with the Ricoh Theta Z1, and we talked about some of the things you should think about when you're shooting HDRIs for VFX, like where to place the camera to capture the HDRI, and the importance of adding tracking markers to your set so you can do camera tracking in post-production. In this video, we're going to use the software Syntheyes to do camera tracking, otherwise known as camera solving or match moving. Match moving is a key step in taking 2D footage and putting 3D models into it. I'll show you 2 ways to do it. 1, the automatic way with simple footage, and 2, the manual way with more difficult footage. I'm Alex Pierce from LightsailVR.com. We make tutorials on virtual production, visual effects, CG, and more. Make sure to subscribe to get more content like this. Okay, let's get started. Syntheyes might have issues with certain codecs like ProRes, for example. Even if it does read it, you're probably still better off converting your footage into a JPEG sequence or something similar just for the tracking part of it. So let's go ahead and drag this into Media Encoder, and I'm going to change this to JPEG. Make sure that export video is on, make sure export as a sequence is on. I'm going to leave the quality and resolution at max because we do want to have good information for us to track. Okay, if this is the first time you're looking at Syntheyes, don't let it overwhelm you. There's a lot of advanced features, and really we only need to touch about 2% of this program to get an auto solve for footage that's relatively simple. So this is the video we're going to be looking at to track. So this is 60 frames per second, and you can see if I pause this at any point, it's still sharp. It's very sharp. So even here where there's motion blur, you can still read Kino flow here, and you can still sort of read the bottom line here. So at no point is there any crazy motion blur. Also, the camera basically just moves a little bit forward, a little bit to the left. It's pretty steady. It's still handheld, but it's pretty steady. So this should be pretty simple for Syntheyes to track. So all you have to do is click and drag it in. You want to make sure that you set your frame rate correct. It should automatically read this, but if not, make sure you set this yourself. Then you can worry about all this stuff if you want, but the only thing I'm going to mention here is start and end frame. So if you don't want to start at the frame 0, for instance, you don't have to. I recommend that you do track from before and after. You give yourself some handles. It'll help improve your tracking usually. So anyway, let's go ahead and press OK. And you can see our footage here. And all you have to do right now is press auto. All right, after it finished, you press OK, and then it comes to here. And you can see, if you've never looked at this Syntheyes before, this may not make sense to you, but if you look, these tracking markers actually do look like they are super glued to the floor here. So this is a good track. Like I said, with this type of footage, with no motion blur, very simple camera moves, Auto did an excellent job. So this is good, but let's refine it a little bit. Let's go up to Track, Clean Up Trackers, and just press Fix. Okay, and then we'll go to the Solver tab, change Automatic to Refine, and press Go. In this example, it actually didn't change too much, but that's okay. So now we want to think about how can we make Syntheyes understand the scale of our world and where the ground is right now. So the way we do that is we go over to the 3D tab, and you can see in this view, if I press play, you can see the motion of the camera. You can see it goes forward, it goes to the left. So that already looks pretty good. So let's do a few things here. Under the 3D tab, change your layout up here from quad to quad perspective. And then in this bottom right one, we're going to go to lock, and that's going to put the camera in view. And you can see right now there's a grid here, and it looks okay, but it doesn't know where our ground is. It doesn't know where we want the world origin to be. So let's fix that. So to do this, we need to select some trackers. So right down here at the bottom of your window here, you have this thing that says Lasso Trackers. So if you click on this, it will allow you to select trackers from your camera view. And if you let go, it will deselect. But if you hold down Shift, you can select more. So let's go ahead and we'll select some of these. We'll hold down Shift, select some more, select some more. You can also do it from these other views. Sometimes these are helpful. If you get out of your camera like this, just go back to lock. If we scroll through our timeline here, you can see there's some that these also might be on the floor, but I'm just going to leave those for now. So now what you do is right click, grid, 2 facets, verts, trackers. You see how it changed the grid here. Now let's go ahead and right click, grid, make grid the ground. Okay, so you can see a bunch of stuff changed, and it just basically changed the perspective so that this is now the ground. These trackers are the ground for sure. So now what we might want to do is line this grid up. To do that, we select 2 that are in a straight line, and in this particular case it might be hard to find a true straight line, but that's okay. We just need it to be close. So what we could do is we could select, let's select these 2 right here, and then right click, grid, 2 facets, and now you can see it's changed the direction of the grid. So now it looks like it's more or less lined up with our perspective here. And now if we want to make this the center of the world, this point right here, if we want this to be in the middle, we can select 1, right click, grid, 2 facets, and then right click, grid, make grid the ground. So now you can see that this is the center of the world, and everything sort of revolves around that. So this will help us later on when we're in our 3D program. Now to export this, we can go to File, Export, and then choose whichever one you want. I'm going to do Blender, and we'll just save this as the default, and make sure it's 2.8 plus, and then just press OK with the defaults. And that's it for the auto tracking. Okay, now let's talk about manually tracking, or supervised tracking as they call it in Syntheyes. So I'm going to just play through this. This is going to be our footage that we track. This was shot at 24 frames per second, and there is definitely some motion blur. If you look here, if you remember in the other one, the 60 frames per second version, you could read Kino flow and you could sort of read what was underneath. But here, even closer to it, we can't read any of this. So a lot of this motion blur would be a problem, especially for auto tracking. But even for manually tracking, these are going to be, it's going to be a little bit tricky to use this. And you can see the camera movement is also a lot more difficult. It's not as steady, and it goes from here, and we go and we turn and we look totally around. We look to the back. So because we do that, we lose a lot of some of these things that will be easy to track. We're going to lose them. We're only going to be able to use them for half of the shot. So this is a little bit more challenging shot than what we had before, and let's look at how we can solve for it. I've turned the video into an image sequence, and to bring an image sequence into Syntheyes, all you have to do is drag the first one into Syntheyes, and it should automatically read it. I'll go ahead and press Auto to show you what kind of a job Auto would do on footage like this. So let's go ahead and try that. Okay, so it says it solved the scene, but let's go ahead and just play through this and see. You can see even at the beginning, these trackers are not tracked to anything right now. They're just floating on the screen, and they'll probably pick up here in a minute. Yeah, so it looks like it solved, it did an okay job for the end of the scene. So you can see this here. Looks like these tracking markers are working up until the camera move, and then they just sort of disappear. Now there are hybrid approaches where you can use these tracking markers and you can do some stuff and you can go back and do more automatic stuff. But I want to just show you how to start from scratch. So let's start over. Okay, we're back to clean footage. So let's go over to the Trackers tab. If you hold down C and click left mouse anywhere on the footage, you can see it adds a tracking marker. And it depends on what frame you're on. So if I add this on frame 99, you can see down here we have this keyframe basically that shows it starts here and it goes throughout the rest of this thing, right? Go ahead and delete that. So where your playhead is important. And the other thing is down here, you can see this playback direction is forward. If I put playback direction backwards, it plays backwards. And depending on where, if I put another tracker, I'll hold down C and click left mouse, you can see that this tracker now goes to the left. Undo that. And so whichever direction the timeline is, it will change the marker for that. So if I hold down C and while it's forward, then over here you can see that the track direction is forward. If I come over here, forward. If I change the direction to back, you see it didn't actually change the direction of this marker, but if I add another marker, it's tracking backwards. See that? So let's just go ahead and I'm going to delete all of those. So now I should have no markers. And in this particular shot, we could start either at the front or the end. I think it's going to be easier to start at the end and track backwards. And then we'll definitely have to start from here. We'll also have to go from here and make some trackers there, but that's okay. Let's go to the very, very last frame. And we can do, let's go ahead and zoom in here. I know I'm gonna wanna track some things on the floor. So, and the best thing is if you can get a point in the scene that is tracked throughout the entire shot. So it looks like there might be a few, this piece of tape right here, looks like it might be in there from the very beginning all the way to the end. That's going to be a little bit harder to track because it's not actually an X. So let's go ahead and just start with, let's go ahead and start right here on this corner. So I'm going to hold down C, I'm going to go to the very last frame, make sure my direction is backwards, hold down C, and I'm going to click right on the edge of this point here. And then this outside ring is going to be what area it's going to look in. And this is going to be the actual pattern that it tracks. So you can experiment with this on your own to see what's going to make the most sense. The bigger this is, the slower it's going to be to track. And typically the more accurate it will be, but that's not always necessarily true. So for something like this, I might just include the entire tracker and we can just go from there. Now, if I go ahead and if I press spacebar right now to play, if I just press spacebar, it's actually tracking. So you can see this. It's actually, if you look up here, you can see it's moving a little bit, and you can see the position here. You can see that it is actually tracking all of this. Okay, and we can try to let this track, and we can see where it goes. But you can see there it got off. See how it got off? If we go backwards till it's on, what we can do is, before it gets off, so right here, we can add a keyframe. There's different ways you can do this. One way is just to go up here to this key and press now. So now we've added a keyframe there, and down here you can see on this timeline there's a keyframe down here and a keyframe here. It might be hard to see right now, but there's a black tick mark, and that shows where the keyframe is. And now I want you to look at your keyboard, ASDF. Those are going to be, your 4 left fingers are going to rest on those keys. So S and D go forward and backward frames. So S goes back 1 frame, D goes forward 1 frame, F goes to the next keyframe, in this case down here, A goes to the previous keyframe, which is here. So once we get into this, those are going to be your shortcuts that you're going to need to use a lot. The other one to keep in mind is Z. So if I go back here till this gets off, if I want to add a tracking marker right down here, I can hold down Z and then click left mouse. It's going to move our tracker to that point of origin. You can also, of course, just click and drag like this. You can hold down Control, which will give you even more refined movements. And you can also do it from up here. So you can click and drag this as well. Click Control, drag it. But holding down Z and then clicking it is sometimes the best way to do it. You can put your mouse right where you need it to go, and then just hold down Z and press left mouse. So now when you do that, it automatically creates a keyframe. So if I go back 1 frame, hold down Z, left click, it moved our tracker there and it made a keyframe. So you can do this frame by frame if you want. So instead of manually adding keyframes, what you can do is you can go up to Track and then down to Stop on Auto Key. And then right here where it says Key Now, right? If we press this, it will get rid of that key. If we press this, it was going to put a keyframe right on this mark. Instead of keying now, we can say key every so many frames. So in this case, we can do 8 frames. And then we can also set the key smooth to something. So we just go ahead and just push 8, which is going to help it be smoother. With our tracker selected, if we press spacebar, it moved 8 frames forward, in this case backwards, and it automatically stopped and added a keyframe. You see that down here, it added a keyframe. If we go all the way back to the beginning and we press spacebar, it's going to add a keyframe, and if we press spacebar, spacebar, spacebar. And this is a great way to track because you can zoom in, spacebar, make sure it's tracking correctly, and then every time you press spacebar, you've basically created a keyframe, so you know it's good. If you know, like this whole beginning of the shot, we don't actually want it to stop every 7 frames or 8 frames, we can go up to Track and turn off Stop Auto Key. And now it's just going to create a key every 8 frames, and it's not going to stop automatically. And you can look up here, you can look over here to see how it's doing. And then you can see it just sort of, once it lost the track, it turned the tracker off. This blue bar goes away. So it lost the track, and now it's not going to know where to pick it back up. So we need to let it know. So if we look here, this is this corner here. Come back through our footage, and right there, our tape is back. So I'm just going to scoot back a few frames, and I'm going to hold down Z and left click. It's going to add a tracker there. And because this tracking area is actually outside of the footage, we might need to do this frame by frame until it's all the way in. If you change the size of your tracking marker, it's going to update it for the entire duration. So you don't really want to do that unless you need to make it bigger. So I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to go through frame by frame. S to go back, okay, and then I'm going to hold down Z. S to move back a frame, Z to move the tracker to that point, S, and now it's starting to pick up the track again. So I'm just going to go frame at a time right now because it's getting harder and harder for us to see it. And if you see down here, it's going to continue making keyframes, so that's good. But I'm still going to move it 1 frame at a time just because I'm afraid it's going to start losing it, and I don't want it to start losing it. So I'm just going to go 1 frame at a time. And it's a little bit off now, but it still looks okay. So I'm actually just going to, for now, I'm not going to worry about it too much. Just want to sort of get through this first tracking marker. And let's go ahead and I'm going to press spacebar. Okay, see, it lost it. So let's go back to press F to go to the last one. F again, we're here. Zoom in here. Yeah, this is going to get difficult for it to track. So I might have to go through frame by frame. Hold down Z, left click. There's another reason why Z helps really well, because if your computer starts to freeze up like this, it's hard to just click and drag to move it. It's much easier to just hold down Z and left click and let go, because even if it takes my computer a minute to figure it out, it will eventually move it to where I want it to go. And this is one of those aim small, miss small things. The tighter you can make it, the better, obviously. And you'll have to decide on a shot-by-shot basis, on a tracker-to-tracker basis, if it's that important or not. If it gets too far away where you can't track it anymore, you can also just turn it off. To turn this tracker off, you can just come up here, right here, and you can disable it. And now you can see it's disabled. If I turn it back on, you can see this light blue means it will continue to track. This means it is not going to track anymore. I will continue to track the rest of this, and then when I'm done with this, what you do is you lock it. You make sure that you lock it. That way it doesn't track anything differently, you don't accidentally bump it or move it. But if we scrub back through this footage, it should more or less look like it is attached to our ground. Come back to this side, And that looks pretty good to me. If at any time you want the playback to be normal or half speed or whatever, go to View, and then instead of frame by frame, do normal speed. Okay, so we have our first tracker, and it looks pretty good. If you're brand new to tracking, I actually suggest that you continue just to do one tracker at a time and focus all of your attention on that tracker. But for the sake of the tutorial, I'm going to show you something else you can do. So let's say we want to track several things all at the same time. We can do that, of course. And maybe what we should do is, we know that this whole end section is pretty good, right? I mean, it doesn't start moving until about 390. So let's go ahead, and what we'll do is we'll start a bunch of trackers and we'll let it auto track till about 390. And then we'll stop that and we'll lock everything, and then we'll just continue one at a time to get through this motion. And maybe what we'll do is we'll do the same thing on this side. But let's go ahead and start at the end. So I'm going to go all the way to the last frame, and I'm going to hold down C to create a marker. Okay, and I am going to just add a few markers here. So I'll choose all these ones on the floor. You can press 5 on the number pad to center up the tracker. So if I press C to add a tracker, and then if I'm back here and I press 5, it'll center on the active tracking marker. Okay, right now I'm choosing mostly tracking markers on this side of the frame because I know that we're going to be pivoting, and I know that I'm going to want tracking markers on as many on this side as possible, because we turn to the left, and all these, if I put a tracking marker here, it's basically going to disappear as soon as we start the move. So you can put tracking markers everywhere, but think about the camera movement and where you're going to need trackers throughout the entire shot. So if we go all the way to the end, we can press Control A to select everything. And with all of them selected, if I press spacebar or if I press play, it will start tracking. And we can go ahead and turn off stop on auto key. We're basically going to let this auto track up until about 390. So Control A, select all, spacebar. And now you can see it takes a lot longer to scrub through these frames because it is actively tracking about 10 different trackers here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and press stop. I don't want to accidentally mess up any of these trackers, so what I'm going to do is, if they're already selected, or I can press Control A to select them all again, and then I'm going to press lock. So it's going to lock all of these trackers so we don't accidentally mess anything else up. But let's go ahead and click on the tracker and continue the track. I will use this paint box as an example. So you can see with just this one selected, you can see all the keyframes here, and we can cycle through using F, and we can just look up here in this box to check and make sure the tracking looks like it's good. It does. So let's go to the last keyframe here, and I'm going to go back to track and stop on auto key, and I'm going to continue the process. I'm going to press spacebar, and it lost it. So let's press back to F, get back to that one, and we'll just go one frame at a time. Oh, I got to unlock it. All right, now let's try pressing on spacebar. Okay, so that still looks okay. Spacebar, spacebar. I'm basically waiting to see if it looks okay. Now you can see here, this is where motion blur is going to be a big issue. If we press space again, it's doing a pretty good job so far. You can press 5 on the keyboard to center up on that tracker. You can also just look here. So let's go back. By pressing F, I'm just going back to the last one. Okay, so I'm going to center up, press A to get back to that one. So if we cycle between these two, you can see it's sort of below the E. Here it's sort of below the E. Here it's a little bit off, so I'm going to hold down Z and click where I think it should be. Now I'm just going to move frame at a time. Actually, I got one more keyframe, so let me press A to go to that keyframe. And this one's way off, but it's hard to tell where it's at. So I think I'm going to leave it where it's at, and I'm just going to press S to go to the next frame. And I'm going to put a keyframe here. And I'm just going to do the best that I can. So I think somewhere around here. I'm going to hold down Z and click. That's going to add a keyframe. And then here see between this frame and this frame, this one it turns off. If you see pink up here, that means it's off. And you can see this switch right here. Right now it's up. That means the tracker's on. And then if it goes down, the tracker goes off. So let's go ahead and we can scrub through this footage, but I know we never see that piece again. So what we can do now is we can go ahead and lock this tracker. And again, it's always good to sort of scrub through your footage and just see, does the tracking marker work? Does it look like it's actually attached? And I would say it does. I think it does. It's pretty good. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. What we'll do now, actually, I'll leave these locked for now. Let's go back to the very beginning, and we're going to change the playhead direction, so it's going to track forwards. And let's track some things on this side of the screen. So, and if you press 0, it will go back to full screen. So if you zoomed out, you can press 0, and it'll go back to full screen. What we're going to do here is this camera moves forward, and then it pivots, turns around basically counterclockwise, and faces the opposite direction. So we're going to need tracking markers on this side of the footage for sure. We could put some over here, but they're not going to be as important as the ones over here. We definitely do need tracking markers that are on the ground, and as many as we can get on the ground is going to help us because we are going to put a CG object on the ground. This is also true if, for instance, you were going to put something on this wall over here. You would want to make sure that you have a lot of trackers on the wall so you have a good solve for where that wall is. So with that said, let's go ahead and we're going to add a tracker, but let me see. We've already added a bunch of stuff on the floor, so let's actually go back here and add one we know we don't have. And let's do this Kino flow, for example. So with my playback direction forward, I'm going to hold down C, press left click, and I'm just going to put this whole logo will be a tracking marker for us, and that size looks okay. So I'll go ahead and turn off the stop on auto key, and I'm just going to let it track until it messes up, and then we'll stop. Okay, so I'm going to press space bar. So far it looks good. It still looks okay, and then we lose it. So let's back up here. Press 5 to center up on it, and let's see where it sort of gets out of whack. So you can see when we put this tracking marker, it's right at the sort of right in the center of this Kino flow, and it sort of ends up in a similar place, but it's a little bit lower. You can see down here it's on the black instead of at the very beginning it's still on the yellow. So let's see where that starts to get off. Still on the yellow, still on the yellow. Now it's on the black. So let's go back here. Let's go to this frame. And now if we press F, we'll go to the next keyframe. And what we can do is we can go A, and just sort of look at where it should be. Okay, it should be lined up basically right around here. So I'm going to hold down Z and press left mouse, which is basically just going to move that keyframe where I want it to be. Now I can press F, go to the next keyframe, and I can do the same thing, press 5 to center it up. And I want to say it's around here. It's blurry, so of course it's not going to be perfect. So just do your best of guessing where it's at. Sometimes it's easier to zoom out and sort of get an idea of what you're looking at. Okay, I will continue to add trackers until I feel there's enough to solve the scene. I will continue to repeat the same process for tracking. The next steps are the same as they were in automatic, so jump back to that section to see how to set the ground plane and to export. Alright, that's going to wrap up this video. In the next video, we'll take an HDRI shot with the Ricoh Theta Z1, we'll use camera tracking data that we got from Syntheyes, and we'll bring both of those into Blender to light and render a VFX shot. If you've never used Blender before, it can be a little overwhelming, but it's a very exciting program, and I'll show you exactly what you need to do to set it all up. All right, I'll see you in the next video.